June 14th, 1645. The fields of Naseby, Northamptonshire. When Parliamentary forces opened a mass grave outside the village 3 months after the battle, they expected to find the bodies of Royalist soldiers. What they discovered instead were the partially decomposed remains of 67 horses, each bearing identical markings on their skulls. Precise, deliberate puncture wounds that couldn't have come from any weapon used in the English Civil War. The investigating officer, Captain Thomas Fairfax, wrote in his private journal, "These beasts did not die in battle. They were prepared for it. But the truth was far more terrifying before we uncovered the truth about the Battle of Naseby cavalry. 1645 Cromwell's Ironsides horses trained to stand under fire, the disciplined mounts that revolutionized cavalry tactics. Make sure to subscribe to Fear Sermon and ring that notification bell. We're diving deep into one of history's most disturbing military secrets, and you won't want to miss what we've uncovered. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. We love hearing from our community of mystery seekers. Now let's journey back to a time when England tore itself apart, and desperate men sought ungodly methods to secure victory. The year is 1642, and England stands on the precipice of civil war. King Charles I has dismissed Parliament, ruled without them for 11 years, and now attempts to arrest 5 members of the House of Commons. The nation fractures along lines of loyalty, religion, and political philosophy. Brother turns against brother, father against son. In the countryside of Northamptonshire, the old feudal order crumbles as Puritan zealots speak of a new Jerusalem, while Royalist cavaliers cling to divine right and tradition. Oliver Cromwell, a relatively unknown member of Parliament from Huntingdon, watches his country descend into chaos. At 43 years old, he possesses no formal military training. Yet something burns within him, a conviction so absolute, so consuming, that men who meet his gaze speak of feeling looked through rather than at. In the spring of 1643, Cromwell begins assembling his cavalry regiment in the Eastern Association. He doesn't recruit from the nobility or landed gentry, as is customary. Instead, he seeks out men of spirit, Puritan farmers, blacksmiths, and tradesmen who believe God has chosen them for this moment. The locals call them the Ironsides, named for their unwavering discipline in battle. But discipline alone doesn't explain what happened at Naseby. The village of Naseby itself is unremarkable, a collection of stone cottages and a modest church dedicated to All Saints, surrounded by rolling fields where sheep outnumber people 3 to 1. The villagers live as their ancestors have for centuries, tending crops, paying tithes, and staying clear of the war that rages across their country. Then, in January 1645, soldiers arrive. They requisition the old monastery ruins 2 miles north of the village, a crumbling structure abandoned since Henry VIII's dissolution of the monasteries a century earlier. The lead officer, a severe man named Major Thomas Harrison, offers no explanation. He posts guards at every entrance and forbids locals from approaching within 100 yards. At night, the villagers hear sounds. Mary Hutchinson, a farmer's wife, later testified before the church court. "They were screaming, sir, but not quite right. Like horses, but deeper. Wrong somehow. My husband told me to shut the windows and pray, but I heard it clear through the stone walls. Went on for hours, it did." The villagers notice other peculiarities. Cromwell himself visits the monastery ruins weekly, arriving after sunset and departing before dawn. Carts covered in canvas make the journey from Cambridge, their wheels leaving deep ruts in the muddy roads. Whatever they carry is heavy. Heavy enough that it takes 6 men to unload each crate. And there are the disappearances. 3 RSEs vanish from local farms in February, then 7 more in March. The owners report the thefts to the constable, but he refuses to investigate. When pressed, he shows them a letter bearing Cromwell's seal. All horses within 10 miles of Naseby are subject to military requisition. No compensation will be provided. Parliamentary necessity supersedes civilian property rights. But something else troubles the villagers more than the stolen livestock. The soldiers who guard the monastery ruins never speak. Not to each other, not to locals, not even to bark orders. They communicate through hand signals and written notes. When a village boy throws a stone at one of the guards as a prank, the soldier doesn't shout or give chase. He simply stares at the child until the boy runs home weeping, claiming the guard's eyes were empty, like looking into a well. Reverend Edmund Staunton, the village priest, decides to investigate. On the night of April 3, 1645, he approaches the monastery ruins during a new moon. In his diary, discovered in the church archives in 1889, he describes what he witnessed. I heard the chanting first. Latin, but corrupted. Wrong declensions, wrong conjugations. As if the words themselves were being bent to purposes for which they were never intended. I crept closer, though every instinct screamed to flee. Through a gap in the wall I saw them, 30 horses arranged in a perfect circle. At the center, Major Harrison held a book I did not recognize. The horses stood absolutely still. Not the stillness of well-trained animals, but the stillness of statues, of dead things. Harrison spoke words I will not repeat, even in this private record. And the horses screamed, but they did not move, did not run. They screamed and screamed while standing perfectly still, and I understood then that I was witnessing something that should not exist in God's creation. Reverend Staunton fled. He never spoke publicly about what he saw, but his diary entries from that night forward become increasingly frantic, filled with prayers for forgiveness and references to the sin of silence. The first incident that should have alerted authorities occurred on April 15, 1645. A Parliamentary scout regiment encounters a small royalist force near Market Harborough, 12 miles from Naseby. The engagement is brief, 50 men on each side, a skirmish that wouldn't merit mention in the official histories, but something happens that the surviving soldiers cannot explain. Lieutenant James Willoughby, in his report to the Eastern Association Command, writes, "We engaged the enemy cavalry near the ford. Our own horses became difficult. They reared and bucked, throwing several riders. But then Captain Morrison's unit arrived, the new men from the Naseby training ground. Their mounts advanced through musket fire as if walking through a summer meadow. No flinching, no fear. I watched a ball strike one beast directly in the shoulder, and it did not even break stride. The Royalists fled, not from our numbers, for we were evenly matched. They fled from something they saw in those horses. I cannot articulate it better than this. They were looking at animals that should not be alive. 3 of Morrison's horses died in that engagement, not from their wounds, but exactly 12 hours later. All 3 collapsed simultaneously in their stalls, as if an invisible hand had reached out and stopped their hearts. The second incident follows a pattern. May 2nd, 1645. Another skirmish, this time near Guilsborough. Parliamentary forces under Cromwell's direct command clash with Prince Rupert's cavalry, the most feared horsemen in England. The Royalists have terrorized Parliamentary forces for 3 years with their aggressive charges and superior horsemanship. Niceau, perfect. The horses stood in absolute alignment, not shifting weight, not tossing heads. Like soldiers carved from stone. Prince Rupert's men charged. Their battle cry shook the earth. Our horses should have startled. Some should have bolted. It is the nature of the beast when confronted with thunder and fury. Not one moved. The Royalists crashed into our line, and it was like watching waves break against a cliff. Our men fired their pistols at point-blank range, then drew swords. The horses never flinched. I saw one take a pike thrust to its chest. I saw the blade enter, and the creature simply continued, turned its head and bit the pikeman's shoulder with such force it tore muscle from bone. The Royalists broke. I have never seen Prince Rupert's cavalry break before. They fled in complete disorder, and several of their soldiers were weeping, actually weeping. After the battle, Cromwell orders the wounded horses destroyed immediately. Not treated, destroyed. He personally shoots 3 of them in the head, and when questioned about wasting valuable animals, he responds with words that several witnesses record. Better dead than corrupted further. The third incident is when whispers begin spreading through the Parliamentary army. May 20th, 1645. No battle this time. Just a routine transfer of cavalry units from Naseby to the main army gathering near Leicester. The column of riders travels through the night, unusual enough to warrant attention. But what locals report is far stranger. A miller named Robert Whitfield is returning home from a neighboring village when he encounters the column. In testimony given to the Quarter Sessions Court in 1647, he states, "I pulled to the side of the road to let them pass, as is proper. There were perhaps 200 riders. I heard no hoofbeats. God is my witness, sir, I heard no sound of horses, the jingle of tack, the creak of leather, men's voices, but the horses made no sound at all. I thought perhaps the road was softer there, muffling the noise, but then they passed through, a puddle, a great wide puddle from the recent rains. The hooves made no splash. They struck the water surface and it did not ripple. I watched until they vanished into darkness, and I swear to you, several of those horses cast no shadows in the moonlight. Other witnesses corroborate parts of Whitfield's account. A shepherd reports seeing the same column and noting that his dogs, 3 fearless mastiffs that had seen off wolves, cowered and urinated in terror at the sight of the horses. An elderly woman in Clipston claims the horse's eyes reflected moonlight like cat's eyes, but red instead of green. The fourth and most disturbing incident occurs on June 3, 1645. A private named William Clark is assigned to tend the cavalry horses at the staging area near Naseby. He's a country boy who grew up around animals, knows their temperaments, can calm a spooked stallion with a whisper. But these horses unsettle him from the start. In a letter to his sister, intercepted by Royalist intelligence and preserved in the Bodleian Library, he writes, "Dearest Sarah, I know not if this letter will reach you, but I must tell someone what I have seen, lest I go mad with the weight of it, not feel." Harrison saw me watching. He closed the book and said, "Private Clark, do you believe in necessary evils?" I told him I believed in following orders. He smiled, the first time I've seen him smile, and said, "Good, because what we've created here will win the war, and afterward we'll kill every last one of them and burn their corpses. They'll serve God's purpose, then return to hell where such things belong. Sarah, I request transfer to an infantry regiment tomorrow. I would rather face Royalist muskets than spend another night with these creatures." Private Clark's transfer request is denied. 3 days later, he deserts. He's captured a week after that and executed for cowardice. Before his hanging, he tells the chaplain, "Death is a mercy compared to what awaits this army. Those horses are damnation given flesh, and every man who rides them carries a piece of that damnation in his soul. If this story is giving you chills, hit that like button. Share this with someone who loves dark mysteries, because what happens next at Naseby will change England forever. Let's discover what happens next. June 14, 1645, 10:47 in the morning. The Battle of Naseby begins. King Charles I commands approximately 7,500 men, the last significant Royalist field army in England. Facing him, 15,000 Parliamentary soldiers under Sir Thomas Fairfax and Oliver Cromwell. The king knows this is likely his final chance to break the Parliamentary forces and salvage his crown. The battle unfolds on rolling terrain near the village. Prince Rupert leads the Royalist right wing in a devastating cavalry charge that smashes through the Parliamentary left. For a moment, it appears the Royalists might triumph. Rupert's horsemen pursue the fleeing enemy off the battlefield entirely, leaving the Royalist center exposed. That's when Cromwell unleashes his Ironsides. The accounts of what happens next vary wildly depending on who's writing, but certain details remain consistent across all sources. Sir Thomas Fairfax, commander of the new model army, later writes in his official report, "Cromwell's cavalry executed a charge of unprecedented precision. In 30 years of military service, I have never witnessed such discipline. They advanced at a controlled trot, no wild galloping, no breaking formation, and struck the Royalist line with devastating effect." But the Royalist survivors tell a different story. Sir Jacob Astley, a Royalist commander captured after the battle, gives testimony during his interrogation that was suppressed for 150 years. "They were not men fighting men. Those horses, Christ preserve me, those horses were demons clothed in flesh. I watched a musketeer fire directly into one beast's skull. The ball struck home, I saw brain matter spray from the wound, and the creature continued its charge. It trampled my musketeer into the mud, then turned and bit another man in half." Bit him in half. What horse has jaws strong enough to sever a man's spine? The Royalist cavalry attempts to regroup and countercharge. They last 45 seconds. Chaplain Richard Baxter, who tends the wounded after the battle, records in his diary, "I have witnessed many battles, but never such carnage concentrated in so brief a time. The Royalist horsemen who engaged Cromwell's regiment were torn apart is the only phrase adequate, not killed cleanly. Torn apart, I found bodies missing limbs, missing faces, open from throat to groin as if by enormous claws. When I examined the Parliamentarian horses, I noted wounds that should have been mortal. Severed arteries, exposed organs, shattered bones. Yet they continued to function until the battle ended. Only after our victory was secured did they begin to fall. And when they fell all at once. Within 10 minutes, 67 horses collapsed. All dead within the hour. I performed an unauthorized examination of 3 carcasses before Major Harrison's men disposed of them, the horses. Hearts were wrong, too large, too dense, and containing chambers that should not exist in any terrestrial anatomy. When I cut into the muscle tissue, it was fibrous and tough, more like cured leather than flesh, and the smell, sulfur and copper, and something else. Something that made my eyes water and my stomach heave. The Battle of Naseby ends in total Parliamentary victory. King Charles flees, his army shattered. The war is effectively over, but in the immediate aftermath something happens that disappears from official records. Captain Thomas Fairfax, nephew of the commanding general, is ordered to organize burial details for the dead. 3 months later, he's the one who discovers the mass grave containing Cromwell's horses. In his private journal, he describes what else he finds. The grave was located in a ravine 2 miles from the battlefield, far from the main burial pits. Why so distant? Why so hidden? I opened it expecting to find royalists dead, perhaps casualties we'd overlooked. The horses lay in precise rows, each oriented north-south, 67 in total. Their flesh had decomposed, but the bones remained. I'm no surgeon, but I know horse anatomy well enough. These skeletons were wrong. Extra vertebrae, elongated jaw structures, ribs that curved at unnatural angles. But the skulls, God help me, the skulls told the true story. Each bore the same markings, 3 puncture wounds forming a triangle on the forehead precisely centered above where the eyes would have been. The holes penetrated completely through the bone into the brain cavity. They were made before death, I could tell from the healing patterns around the edges. Some of these horses lived for weeks, perhaps months, with holes drilled into their skulls. I ordered my men to excavate further. Beneath the horses we found a layer of ash and bone fragments, human bone fragments, crushed and burned but identifiable. The remains of at least 30 individuals, all burned post-mortem based on the fracture patterns, and beneath that layer buried deepest books. 9 volumes bound in leather, I pray, was cowhide and not something else. The texts were in Latin but corrupted, margins filled with handwritten notes in English, detailing procedures and rituals, diagrams of horse anatomy with annotations like optimal insertion point and duration of effect, 40 days maximum. I recognized the handwriting, Major Thomas Harrison's. The final page of the last volume contained a single sentence in English: "Forgive us, Lord, for we have birthed victory from damnation, and the stain upon our souls is permanent." Captain Fairfax burns the books immediately. He orders the graves sealed and posts guards to prevent further excavation. In his journal he writes, "Some truths are too terrible to expose. Let history remember Naseby as a righteous victory. Let no one know the price we truly paid for it." But not everyone remains silent. 3 soldiers from the burial detail go missing within a week. 2 are found dead, apparent suicides. The third, a private named Henry Thompson, is discovered in a church 50 miles away, carving words into his own flesh with a knife. Not horses, not horses, not horses. He dies from blood loss before revealing what he meant. The official investigation into the Naseby cavalry begins in September 1645. Not because authorities discover evidence of wrongdoing, but because they cannot ignore the mounting testimony from traumatized soldiers. Parliament convenes a special committee led by Colonel John Hutchinson, specifically chosen because he was not present at Naseby, and has a reputation for meticulous record-keeping. His mandate: determine whether Cromwell employed ungodly methods in training his cavalry. The investigation faces immediate obstacles. Major Thomas Harrison, the primary architect of the cavalry training program, has vanished. His quarters at the Naseby Monastery are found empty except for a letter address. To Cromwell, "What we created served its purpose. I go now to seek forgiveness in solitude and prayer. Do not search for me. Some instruments of God's will must be destroyed after use, lest they tempt others to damnation." Harrison is never seen again. Rumors place him in Scotland, then Ireland, then the New World. In 1660, after the Restoration, Royalist authorities briefly prioritize finding him for trial, but the search yields nothing. He becomes one of the Civil War's enduring mysteries. Cromwell himself proves uncooperative. When summoned before the committee in October 1645, he provides only written responses through an intermediary. His statement, preserved in the Parliamentary archives, is a masterwork of deflection. The Ironsides Cavalry Regiment was trained using methods of discipline and godly instruction no different from any other military unit. That our horses showed remarkable calm under fire reflects the quality of their breeding and the skill of their handlers. Any claims of unnatural methods stem from the fearful imaginations of defeated enemies and superstitious witnesses. He refuses to appear in person, claiming urgent military duties. The committee lacks the authority to compel England's most successful general to attend. The committee interrogates 47 witnesses over 3 months. Their testimonies paint a disturbing picture. Dr. William Harvey, personal physician to King Charles I before defecting to Parliament, is brought in to examine the exhumed horse remains from the mass grave. His report, classified until 1889, states, "The skeletal abnormalities observed in these specimens cannot result from natural variation or disease. The deliberate cranial perforations suggest experimental medical procedures of unknown purpose. Based on the healing patterns, I conclude these animals underwent repeated trepanation while alive. The purpose of such procedures escapes rational explanation. Trepanation on humans is sometimes employed to relieve pressure from head injuries, but these holes are too small and too precisely placed to serve that function. If I were forced to speculate, and I do so with great reluctance, it appears someone was attempting to access specific regions of the equine brain. For what purpose I cannot fathom. The committee interviews survivors from both sides of the battle. A pattern emerges in the royalist testimonies. All describe the parliamentary horses as exhibiting behavior consistent with severe neurological damage or disease, yet maintaining impossible levels of physical performance. Sir Richard Grenville, a royalist cavalry officer, testifies, "I have broken wild stallions. I have trained war horses for 20 years. What I witnessed at Naseby violated every principle of animal behavior. Those creatures felt no pain. I watched one horse continue fighting with its intestines dragging in the mud behind it. Another lost its lower jaw to a sword stroke and kept biting with what remained. But the eyes, Lord preserve me, the eyes were the worst. There was no consciousness in them, no fear, no anger, no awareness. Like looking at painted glass. Those were not animals anymore. They were ambulatory corpses animated by something I have no name for. The investigation uncovers financial records that raise additional questions. The monastery near Naseby received regular shipments from Cambridge throughout early 1645. The supplier, Dr. Edmund Chillingworth, a physician and natural philosopher with expertise in anatomy and chemical compounds. When the committee summons him for questioning, they discover he died in August 1645, allegedly from a sudden fever. His housekeeper provides more details. Dr. Chillingworth returned from his final trip to Naseby in a terrible state. Wouldn't eat, couldn't sleep, spent all day writing in his journal. One night I heard him screaming in his study, "They made me do it, they made me find a way." The next morning he was dead. The physician who examined him found traces of mercury and arsenic in his system. Suicide, they ruled it. But Dr. Chillingworth's journal had disappeared. The committee pursues the journal's whereabouts. A clerk in Cromwell's office admits to retrieving it on direct orders. When asked what became of it, he responds, "Lieutenant General Cromwell read it for 2 hours, then burned it page by page in his fireplace. He never spoke while doing so. Just burned it, stirred the ashes with a poker until nothing remained, then swept the ashes into a box and gave them to me with instructions to scatter them in the Thames." Legal proceedings prove impossible. Parliament cannot prosecute Cromwell. He's too powerful, too politically essential, and his new model army remains loyal to him personally. Attempting to hold him accountable for anything, let alone accusations of unnatural practices, would risk splitting the parliamentary coalition and potentially reigniting the Civil War. The committee considers charging Harrison in absentia, but without a defendant or physical evidence, the books and remains having been destroyed, there's nothing to prosecute. The horses are dead and cremated. The monastery has been demolished. The witnesses are scattered across England, many refusing to testify further due to threats from Cromwell's supporters. In January 1646, the committee issues its final report, a heavily edited document that acknowledges irregularities in cavalry training methods, but concludes no definitive evidence of ungodly practices. The full unedited version remains classified in parliamentary archives and isn't released until 1889. Colonel Hutchinson writes privately to his wife, "We have determined the truth, but dare not speak it. Cromwell and Harrison created something abominable in service of our cause. They succeeded in winning the war, and now we are all complicit in that sin. The committee will close, the evidence will be destroyed, and England will pretend the Ironsides were simply well-trained horses ridden by godly men. The alternative, admitting we achieved victory through damnation, is unthinkable." The aftermath for the common soldiers involved proves tragic. By 1648, 17 men who rode the Ironsides at Naseby have committed suicide. Another 23 are committed to Bedlam Hospital for insanity, exhibiting symptoms that physicians describe as permanent melancholy with violent episodes. Many speak obsessively about their horses, claiming to still hear them screaming at night. One soldier, Edward Denning, keeps a diary throughout his confinement until his death in 1651. The entries grow increasingly disturbed. "The horse I rode was named Thunder. I remember the first time I mounted him after Harrison's treatments began. He was cold, not just cool to the touch, cold like death. His muscles moved mechanically without the usual warmth and life of an animal. I dream about Thunder every night. He's standing in that monastery courtyard, and Harrison is reading from his book, and Thunder is screaming. But his body doesn't move, just his eyes. His eyes follow me, accusing. You knew, they say, you knew what they were doing to us, and you rode us anyway. I deserve this madness, we all do. The monastery site near Naseby becomes local legend. For decades afterward, villagers report strange occurrences. Livestock refuse to graze within 100 yards of the ruins. Dogs won't approach it. Birds don't nest there. The grass grows in unusual patterns, dead patches forming geometric shapes that shift year to year. In 1723, a farmer attempts to clear the site for cultivation. His workers unearth bones, both equine and human, mixed with ash and charred wood. They report an overwhelming smell of sulfur that persists for days. The farmer abandons the project, claiming the land is cursed by old sins. The church investigates in 1725. A priest performs multiple consecrations of the site, documents the proceedings, and recommends the land remain unused in perpetuity. His report includes a footnote: whatever profane acts occurred here have left a permanent stain upon the earth itself. Best to let it remain as a warning to future generations. Some victories cost more than they are worth. Cromwell himself never publicly acknowledges the controversy. He rises to become Lord Protector of England in 1653, ruling until his death in 1658. In his final years, he becomes increasingly religious, spending hours in prayer and reportedly suffering from severe depression. His chaplain notes that Cromwell often spoke about debts yet unpaid and judgment still to come. On his deathbed, witnesses report that Cromwell became delirious, shouting phrases that make little sense. "Tell Harrison the number was too high, the price exceeded the purchase. And God has seen what we did in darkness, and the accounting comes." After Cromwell's death, his body is exhumed during the Restoration and posthumously executed, his head placed on a spike outside Westminster Hall. But there's a detail that never makes the official histories. The men who exhume Cromwell's body report finding something unusual. His skull bears 3 small holes in the forehead, forming a precise triangle. The holes appear to be recent, drilled post-mortem. No one admits to making them. No one can explain their purpose. The implication hangs unspoken. Someone, somewhere, wanted to ensure Cromwell received the same treatment he authorized for his horses. The Battle of Naseby fundamentally altered the trajectory of English history, but not for the reasons taught in textbooks. The official narrative celebrates it as the decisive parliamentary victory that ended the First English Civil War, paving the way for constitutional monarchy and eventually parliamentary democracy. This is true, but incomplete. The hidden truth of Naseby introduced something far more insidious into British military culture: the conviction that victory justifies any method, no matter how morally compromising. Within a decade, similar accusations surface regarding other parliamentary military innovations. In 1652, reports emerged from Ireland describing Cromwell's forces using unnatural tactics during the conquest. Witnesses describe soldiers who fight with inhuman endurance and weapons treated with unknown chemical compounds that cause wounds to fester impossibly fast. The accusations are dismissed as Irish propaganda, but the similarities to the Naseby testimonies are striking. A parliamentary physician named Dr. Robert Boyle, who later becomes one of the founders of modern chemistry, investigates these claims privately. His notes, discovered in the Royal Society archives in 1923, reveal disturbing findings. "I have examined 3 musket balls recovered from Irish casualties. Each contains traces of substances I cannot identify, crystalline compounds that cause severe tissue necrosis beyond what gunpowder alone would produce. When I inquired about the provenance of this ammunition, I was told firmly to cease my investigations." The implication was clear: some methods employed in Ireland are not subject to scrutiny. The Naseby precedent establishes a pattern that persists for centuries. Military historians have long debated why British forces in colonial conflicts displayed unusually ruthless efficiency. The conventional explanation credits superior training and technology, but classified War Office documents released in 2003 reveal a different story. Multiple military research programs throughout the 18th and 19th centuries explicitly reference Naseby protocols as inspiration for developing what we would now call chemical and biological weapons. An 1847 memo from a British Army research facility in India states, "Following the precedent of Cromwell's innovative cavalry methods, we believe certain natural compounds, when properly applied, can enhance soldier performance beyond normal human limits. Initial trials show promising results, though subject mortality remains high." The British government doesn't officially acknowledge these programs until 1968, when international chemical weapons treaties force disclosure. Beyond military applications, Naseby's legacy influences medical ethics in unexpected ways. The procedures performed on Cromwell's horses represent some of the earliest documented cases of experimental neurosurgery. While the techniques themselves were barbaric and the subjects non-consensual, insofar as animals can consent, they demonstrated that precise intervention in brain tissue could alter behavior in predictable ways. Dr. William Harvey, the same physician who examined the Naseby horse remains, later conducts groundbreaking research on blood circulation. His private correspondence suggests the horse autopsies provided crucial insights. The modified cardiac structures observed in those unfortunate beasts, while abominable in their creation, revealed principles of blood flow I had not previously considered. Evil can sometimes illuminate truth, though we must never let that justify the evil itself. The ethical questions raised by Naseby remain unresolved. In 2015, the British Medical Association published a retrospective analysis of the incident, concluding, "The Naseby cavalry program represents an early case study in the dual-use dilemma, when scientific knowledge obtained through immoral means nonetheless advances human understanding. We cannot undo the past or ignore what was learned, but we can acknowledge the profound ethical violations and ensure such methods are never employed again." The psychological impact on veterans introduces another dimension to Naseby's legacy. The high rates of suicide and mental illness among the Ironsides riders represent one of the first documented cases of what we now call post-traumatic stress disorder. Military chaplains and physicians of the period attributed these symptoms to personal moral weakness or demonic influence. In reality, the soldiers were experiencing severe psychological trauma from being complicit in grotesque acts. Reverend Richard Baxter, who counseled many traumatized veterans, writes in 1650, "These men carry a burden no amount of prayer seems able to lift. They speak of guilt so profound it manifests as physical pain. They cannot eat without vomiting, cannot sleep without nightmares, cannot look upon horses without weeping. Modern physicians call it melancholy. I call it the soul's rebellion against sin it was forced to commit." This recognition of moral injury, the damage inflicted when one's actions violate deeply held ethical beliefs, predates formal psychological study by 300 years. The Naseby incident also establishes precedent for government cover-ups. The Parliamentary Committee's decision to suppress evidence and classify their findings creates a template followed by British governments for centuries. From the Irish famine to the Boer War concentration camps to the Bengal famine of 1943, the pattern repeats: acknowledge surface details, suppress damning evidence, prioritize political stability over historical truth. Historian Dr. Margaret Collins, in her 2010 book Hidden Histories, British Military Secrets 1642-1945, writes, "Naseby taught the British establishment that the public need not know the full truth about military operations. The ends, preserving national security, maintaining morale, protecting reputations, were deemed to justify the means of systematic deception. This philosophy became institutional. The specific location of Naseby carries its own legacy. The village remains small and quiet, but it has never fully escaped the shadow of 1645. Local folklore preserves memories the official histories tried to erase. Parents still tell children not to play near the old monastery site. Farmers report that animals behave strangely in that area. Horses especially become agitated, refusing to cross certain boundaries that correspond to no visible features. In 1945, exactly 300 years after the battle, the British Army plans military exercises on the Naseby battlefield site. Local residents protest vehemently. The village priest organizes a petition citing historical desecration concerns, but the real objection runs deeper. The elderly villagers remember stories their grandparents told, stories of cursed ground and sins that stain the earth itself. The army relocates the exercises without explanation. An internal memo obtained through Freedom of Information requests in 2018 notes, "After consultation with the War Office Historical Division, it has been determined that the Naseby site is unsuitable for military training purposes due to unspecified legacy concerns. Recommend permanent exclusion from military use." Perhaps the most lasting impact of Naseby appears in how England processes national trauma. The English Civil War already represented profound social rupture. Family against family, religious faction against religious faction. The revelation that parliamentary forces achieved victory through morally unconscionable methods would have shattered the narrative of righteous rebellion against tyranny. So England chose collective amnesia. The Ironsides became legendary as the finest cavalry in Europe, their discipline and courage celebrated in songs and histories. The uncomfortable questions about how they achieved such supernatural battlefield performance simply disappeared. Each generation learned a simpler story, until the complexity and moral horror faded into myth. This pattern of selective memory, celebrating victories while suppressing the disturbing details of how they were achieved, becomes characteristic of British historical consciousness. The empire's expansion, the world wars, the colonial conflicts, in each case the official narratives emphasize courage and sacrifice, while relegating ethical compromises to classified files and forgotten testimonies. In 2017, the British government finally declassifies the last remaining documents related to the Naseby investigation. Historians gain access to Colonel Hutchinson's unedited report, witness testimonies, and Dr. Harvey's autopsy findings. The revelations spark academic debate but limited public interest. After 372 years, the horror has faded into historical curiosity. Modern readers struggle to connect emotionally with events so distant, described in archaic language, involving technologies they barely understand. But buried in Hutchinson's final addendum to his report is a warning that remains chillingly relevant. What we learned at Naseby is that human beings, when desperate enough, will embrace any method to achieve victory. We will rationalize evil as necessity, transform atrocity into strategy, and then bury the evidence to protect our self-image as righteous. The danger is not that monsters will commit monstrous acts. The danger is that ordinary men, fathers, husbands, believers in God, will commit those same acts and then teach their children to forget. Future generations must remember, the descent into darkness begins not with malice, but with the conviction that our cause justifies any sacrifice, including the sacrifice of our own humanity. So what do you think drove Cromwell and Harrison to such desperate acts? Was it religious zealotry, political necessity, or simple ambition? Leave your theories in the comments below. Was Cromwell a monster who sacrificed morality for victory, or a tragic figure who believed he was serving a higher purpose? Could you make such a choice if you believed the fate of your nation depended on it? Subscribe to Fear's Sermon for more lost chapters of history. The stories too dark for textbooks, too disturbing to celebrate, but too important to forget. We dive deep into the shadows where history hides its most troubling truths. Next week, we're uncovering the truth behind the lost colony of Roanoke, and the evidence suggesting something far worse than simple disappearance. You won't want to miss it. Until then, remember, history is written by the victors, but the truth eventually surfaces. See you in the next video.